When I say that love can turn into loneliness, I'm not speaking from a place of imagination. I'm speaking from the softest and the most wounded part of my truth. There was a time when I believed that loving someone with all I had would be enough to make them stay, enough to make them see me, enough to make them choose me. I used to think that if I cried hard enough, prayed long enough, held on tight enough, then maybe, just maybe, the love I offered would be returned with the same tenderness. But life has a way of teaching you that love, when begged for, doesn't come as affection. It comes as exhaustion. The more I pleaded to be valued, the more invisible I became, until the day I realized I wasn't waiting for love anymore. I was waiting to stop feeling alone in a relationship that was supposed to be my safe place. You see, loneliness inside a bond is far heavier than loneliness outside of it. It sneaks into your mornings, sits with you at dinner, follows you into your sleep, and whispers the same question over and over: why am I not enough? I remember wiping my tears quietly, thinking that silence would keep the peace, that compromise would save what we had, that losing myself was a small price to pay for keeping someone else. But every day, I was shrinking. Every day, a part of me was fading just so I could fit into the small space he offered me. I became a woman who apologized for wanting love, who lowered her voice to avoid argument, who convinced herself that sometimes love hurts even when it shouldn't. That was the version of me I carried for far too long. But the truth is, a heart can only break quietly for so many nights before it starts to hear its own cries. Mine did. It happened slowly, like dawn creeping into a dark room. I started noticing what love was supposed to feel like: a place of warmth, not fear. A place where you don't beg for presents, it's given freely. A place where your tears aren't dismissed and your emotions aren't treated like burdens. When I looked at myself one morning, truly looked, I didn't see the woman I used to be. I saw a shadow of her, someone who had forgotten her worth in the pursuit of being wanted. And that realization didn't hit me like thunder. It came softly, like a whisper telling me, you deserve more than this silence. So I stopped crying for his love. Not because the pain vanished, but because there was nothing left to cry for. You can't force a person to care. You can't teach them how to respect you. You can't make them see your value if they're committed to being blind. And so, step by step, I gathered the broken pieces of myself, the pieces I thought he had taken forever. I picked them up with shaky hands and trembling hope, and I began the slow walk toward myself again. Leaving didn't feel brave at first. It felt terrifying. It felt like I was walking into an empty world, unsure if I would ever feel whole again. But loneliness outside a loveless relationship is not the same loneliness. Out there, it slowly turns into freedom. With time, the silence that once suffocated me began to feel peaceful. The tears that once fell from desperation started falling less often, replaced by small moments of rediscovering my voice, my strength, my dreams. And that's when life opened a door I didn't even see coming. A door that reminded me that endings are punishments. Sometimes they're invitations to something bigger than the heartbreak we survived. But before that miracle arrived, the most important thing happened. I came home to myself. I remembered that love should never require you to disappear to make someone else comfortable. I remembered that the moment you stop chasing what isn't meant for you, life begins to gently place in your hands what is. And that is why I say, with a heart that has traveled through storms, that when love turns into loneliness, it is not the end, it is the beginning of finding your way back to the person you were always meant to be. Leaving was not a decision I made overnight. It wasn't a moment of sudden strength or a burst of courage. It was a long, quiet ache that finally reached its limit. When you spend years giving, hoping, believing, you don't wake up one morning and simply walk away. No, you walk away in pieces. You walk away after countless nights staring at the ceiling, asking yourself why the person you love cannot love you back in the way you deserve. You walk away after realizing you've been clinging to memories instead of reality, holding on to the idea of who someone used to be, not who they have become. I remember the day everything inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouts, no slammed doors, no heavy announcements. It was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that almost scares you because you realize you're no longer fighting for something that has already slipped through your fingers. I was standing in the kitchen, watching him scroll through his phone, ignoring the tears I was trying so hard to hide. And something inside me whispered, not loud, not forceful, just a gentle truth that had waited for too long to be heard. You cannot save something that the other person has already abandoned. That whisper stayed with me. It followed me as I packed small pieces of my life, not all at once, but gradually, one folded shirt, one photograph, one memory at a time. Each thing I picked up made me ask myself a question I had avoided for years. Am I staying because I'm loved, Or because I'm afraid to be alone? And when I finally answered that question honestly, I knew what I had to do. Walking away wasn't an act of strength. It was an act of survival. I needed to save myself from the emptiness I felt every day. I needed to breathe again. I needed to find the version of me who once laughed freely, who didn't apologize for crying, who didn't lower her worth to make someone else feel taller. But when you've lived for so long in someone else's shadow, stepping into your own light feels almost wrong. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like learning to walk all over again. I remember the moment I closed the door behind me. My hands were trembling, my chest felt tight. I kept asking myself if I was making a mistake, if he would change once he realized I was gone, if love would somehow pull us back together. But deep down, beneath all the pain and fear, I knew the truth. He had already let go. I was the only one still holding on. And so I walked. I walked, even though my legs felt weak. I walked, even though every step felt like dragging a heavy world behind me. I walked, because staying would have destroyed me far more slowly, far more silently. Leaving was my only chance to rebuild myself, even if I didn't yet know how. The days that followed weren't easy. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a maze. Some mornings I felt strong, and some nights I felt like calling him, begging for the comfort of the familiar, even if the familiar hurt me. But every time I reached for my phone, I reminded myself why I left. I reminded myself of those lonely nights when I lay awake next to someone who didn't even notice the way my heart was breaking. And slowly, very slowly, I learned something powerful. Peace comes only when you choose yourself. It wasn't until much later that I realized something else. Pain doesn't just change you, it prepares you. It shapes you into someone who understands silence. Someone who knows the value of sincerity. Someone who is no longer afraid to walk away from places where love is not given freely. Leaving didn't close my story, it opened a new one. It created space for blessings I didn't see coming. It created room for the miracle that would eventually enter my life. But that day, the day I walked away, that was the first time in a long time that I chose myself over my fear. I chose my future over my tears. I chose my worth over someone else's indifference, and that choice became the foundation of everything beautiful that came afterward. Life has a strange way of surprising us. At the very moment we think our story has run out of light. When I walked away, I wasn't expecting anything beautiful to follow. I wasn't hoping for miracles. I wasn't praying for blessings. I was simply trying to survive the weight of a love that had become too heavy to carry. My heart was tired, my spirit bruised, and all I wanted was enough peace to breathe without feeling like every breath reminded me of what I had lost. But sometimes, when we stop searching, life quietly places in our path something we never even imagined our hands could hold. In those early days of being alone, I felt empty. I felt like I had left behind a part of myself that I would never recover, but slowly. So slowly that I didn't notice at first, something inside me began to shift. I started focusing on myself, on healing, on rebuilding the parts of me that had been neglected for far too long. I didn't know where I was going or what my future would look like, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to shape my life around someone else's shadow. I was trying to rediscover my own light. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything, the moment that reminded me that even after the deepest heartbreak, life still has the capacity to bloom. I remember sitting in a small clinic, hands trembling, heart racing, hearing words that felt almost unreal. You're expecting. At first, I was stunned, frozen between disbelief and fear. How could something so extraordinary enter my life at a time when everything felt so broken? But the truth is, miracles don't ask for perfect timing. They arrive exactly when your soul needs them, even if you don't know it yet. As the news settled in my heart, an unexpected warmth spread through me. For the first time in months, my tears weren't born from sadness. They were born from awe, from gratitude, from the understanding that endings are not just about loss. They are often the beginning of something far greater than what we had the courage to dream. And when I found out it wasn't just one heartbeat, but two little lives growing inside me, I realized that life was giving me back something far more powerful than the love I had cried for. It was giving me purpose. It was giving me companionship. It was giving me a reason to stand up, to move forward, to become stronger than the pain that had almost destroyed me. Those two tiny heartbeats became my anchor. They became the soft voice whispering, "You are needed, you are chosen, you are loved," even before you hold us. Carrying them was not just a physical journey, it was a spiritual one. It felt like every month, every flutter, every small kick was stitching together the pieces of my heart that I thought would remain shattered forever. I learned to smile again. I learned to hope again. I learned that love, true love, doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it arrives as two souls who depend on you entirely, who love you unconditionally before even opening their eyes. And in those months, I understood something profound. Life doesn't punish you by removing people, it protects you. It pulls you away from those who cannot value you, so it can bring you closer to what is destined for you. Those twins became my destiny long before I even understood the meaning of the word. They became the miracle that taught me that heartbreak is not the end, it is the soil from which new beginnings quietly grow. By the time they came into this world, I was no longer the broken woman who had walked away. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone softer in all the right places, someone who had learned to love herself without needing someone else to tell her she was worthy. Life had taken me through a storm, yes, but it had also placed in my arms the sweetest proof that light always finds its way back. And that is the moment I understood that the unexpected miracle won. Just their arrival. It was the way they brought me back to myself. When I returned, I wasn't returning to prove anything, not to him, not to the world, not even to myself. I was returning because life had brought me full circle, but with a different heart, a different strength, and a different understanding of who I was meant to be. The woman who left was wounded and unsure, trying to escape the weight of unreciprocated love. But the woman who came back, she was rebuilt from the ground up. She had survived the silence, embraced the loneliness, carried a miracle inside her, discovered a strength she didn't even know she possessed. Coming back wasn't about showing him what he lost. It wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't about hearing apologies. It was simply a moment where my past and present stood face to face. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel desperate. I didn't feel the need to convince anyone of my worth. There was a calmness inside me, a quiet confidence that comes only after you've walked through fire and realized you didn't burn, you transformed. I remember stepping into the familiar streets, the ones I had walked countless times, with a heart full of hope and dreams tied to someone who didn't care to hold them. But this time, I wasn't walking with expectations, I was walking with purpose. My arms weren't empty anymore. They were filled with the two blessings life had entrusted to me. And holding them felt like holding a new version of myself, one that had fought, healed, and risen again. People often think strength is loud. They imagine it as bold declarations, fierce words, or grand gestures. But real strength, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in the way you carry yourself, even when your heart remembers the old pain. It shows up in the way your hands don't shake anymore, when you stand in places that once broke you. It shows up in the way you walk into the same world that once rejected you, realize that nothing and no one has the power to dim your light anymore. And that's exactly how it felt, coming back stronger, not broken. I could feel the difference in my footsteps, in my breath, in the way my soul no longer trembled. Where there used to be fear, there was peace. Where there used to be longing, there was acceptance. Where there used to be tears, there was gratitude. I wasn't the woman who cried for love anymore. I was the woman who learned that love is never worth begging for. I didn't need him to see my worth. I didn't need him to understand my pain. I didn't need him to validate the journey I had walked alone, because I had found validation in the quiet places, in the tiny kicks that grew into little hands, in the long nights where I held on to hope, in the mornings where I reminded myself that healing is not a destination, but a daily commitment to being better than the hurt that once consumed you. And when people saw me again, the look in their eyes told me everything. They didn't see a woman trying to rebuild her life. They saw a woman who already had. They saw someone who had lost everything she once wished for, but had gained something far greater in return. They saw a kind of strength that no heartbreak can erase. Coming back wasn't about stepping into the past. It was about recognizing how far I had come. My story didn't need validation. My journey didn't need approval. The only thing that mattered was that I had reclaimed myself, and that, more than anything, was the true victory. In that moment, standing there with my twins in my arms, I understood something deeply. Strength is not proven through anger or revenge. It is shown through the quiet grace of choosing yourself, rebuilding yourself, and returning to your life with a heart that knows its worth. The moment he saw the twins, something shifted in the air, something heavy, something unspoken. Something that carried the weight of years he could never undo. I wasn't prepared for his reaction, because a part of me believed he would look at them the same way he once looked at me, with indifference, with distance, with the coldness that had pushed me away in the first place. But when his eyes met theirs, I saw a crack in the armor he had always worn. I saw a softness he never showed me, and in that single fragile moment I realized just how much life can humble a heart that once took love for granted. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stared, his face draining of color as if he had just been struck by the truth of what he had lost. There was a tremor in his hands, a restless shifting of his breath, And I could tell he was wrestling with a wave of emotions he couldn't control. He had always been proud, always the one who never admitted fault, never apologized, never bent. But standing there in front of the children who carried traces of me and none of him, his pride collapsed. It was like watching a mountain crumble, not loud, not dramatic, but silently, from the inside out. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. I wish I could say his tears healed something in me. But the truth is, I felt nothing. Not anger, not revenge, not pleasure. Just a calm understanding that the balance of power had shifted long before this moment. His apology, his regret wasn't something I needed anymore, because the day I walked away was the day I let go of the version of myself that needed his validation. Still, I watched him struggle, watched the way his throat tightened as he finally whispered the words he had never given me when I needed them most. I'm sorry. His voice cracked, his eyes glistened, and for a brief second, I remembered the nights I had cried for those very words, begging for him to see me, begging for him to hear me. But the woman who once yearned for his remorse no longer existed. His apology came years too late, delivered to a heart that no longer depended on his approval to breathe freely. He reached out a trembling hand, as if touching one of the twins would somehow erase the coldness of the past. But I stepped gently aside, not out of anger, but out of understanding. He had a right to his emotions, but I had a right to protect the peace I had fought so hard to build. His tears were his journey, not my responsibility. His regret was the inevitable consequence of his choices, not something I needed to soothe. And the truth is, regret hits hardest when life shows you what you could have had. When he looked at them, those tiny faces, those quiet breaths, those small hands curled into soft fists, he wasn't just seeing children. He was seeing a future he rejected before it ever had a chance to exist. He was seeing the family he could have held, the joy he could have known, the love he could have nurtured, if he had simply cherished the woman who once stood in front of him without these babies in her arms. But life doesn't give second chances for free. Sometimes it returns to you what you lost, but not for you to keep, only for you to witness. And that's what this moment was, a witness, a lesson. A truth he couldn't escape. His tears weren't for me. They were for himself. They were for the man he could have been and never chose to become. They were for the realization that love doesn't wait forever, and the heart he dismissed had grown stronger without him. And so I let him stand there with his shaking breath and his unspoken regret. I offered no bitterness, no sharp words, no anger. I offered only silence, the kind of silence that comes from healing, from understanding, from knowing that forgiveness is something you carry for your own peace, not something you grant to restore what is already gone. And in that silence, I finally understood that the power had never been in his apology, it was in the woman I became without needing it. Forgiveness is a strange thing. People often imagine it as an embrace, a reunion, a soft ending where two broken hearts come back together and begin again. But standing there, holding my twins close while he stood in front of me with tears soaking into the silence, I realized something he never understood. Forgiveness isn't about going back, it's about letting go. It's about releasing the anger, the expectations, the long nights of unanswered questions, but not returning to the place where those wounds were born. I could feel the weight of his regret, heavy and trembling, almost pleading. His voice shook as he tried to explain himself, to justify the years he made me feel empty. But explanations don't rebuild the parts of you that someone once broke. Regret doesn't undo the loneliness. Apologies don't erase the nights I held my own heart together while he walked away from it. And as he spoke, pouring out the sorrow he never showed when it mattered, I felt something unexpected, not the desire to run back, not the longing for a second chance, but a sense of peace so profound it almost surprised me. Because I wasn't standing in front of him as the woman who used to cry for his love. I was standing there as someone who had walked through the fire and come out softer, wiser, and stronger. Someone who understood her worth now. Someone who no longer needed his presence to feel complete. He begged for another chance. He asked for forgiveness in the form of reconciliation, as if forgiveness must lead to reunion. But I knew better now. I knew that going back would only undo the healing I had fought for every single day. I knew that the woman I had become deserved a love that didn't need to be begged for or proven through suffering. I knew that stepping back into that old life would be stepping back into the shadows I had once escaped. So I forgave him, but not the way he hoped. I forgave him quietly. The way you forgive for your own freedom, not for the other person's comfort. I forgave him because holding on to the bitterness would only weigh me down. And I had two little souls depending on me to rise, not crumble. Forgiveness, for me, was releasing the desire to rewrite the past. It was accepting that the story had unfolded exactly as it needed to, even when it broke me. It was recognizing that his journey was his to carry, and mine no longer included his footsteps next to mine. As he cried and pleaded, I didn't feel cold or cruel. I felt compassionate. I felt human. But compassion doesn't mean returning to a place that once drained you. Compassion doesn't mean giving someone access to your life just because they finally realized your value. Compassion simply means understanding their pain without sacrificing your peace. I looked at the twins, at their gentle faces, at the innocence in their eyes, and I knew that the life I wanted to build for them couldn't include the chaos I fought so hard to leave behind. They deserved a mother who was whole, not one who kept reopening old wounds. They deserved a home built on love, not on regret and broken promises. And I deserved that too. So I told him, with steady breath and a calmness I had earned through every painful night, that I forgave him, but I could not return to him. I told him that my life had taken a different path, one that no longer aligned with the man he used to be. I told him that I wished him healing. I wished him peace, but I could not give him back what he had thrown away. And in that moment, I felt truly free. Free from the weight of waiting. Free from the longing that once consumed me. Free from the version of myself that didn't know her own worth. I walked away not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with quiet strength, carrying the love that never disappointed me, the love of my twins, the love of a new life, the love I had finally learned to give myself. And that is why forgiveness, for me, was never about returning it, was about choosing a future where my heart could finally breathe.